This is the story of how industrial waste scraped off oil drilling equipment in 1859 Pennsylvania became the thing you're putting on your lips right now. That tub of Vaseline sitting in your medicine cabinet, on your nightstand, maybe tucked in your purse, is a refined petroleum byproduct. It comes from crude oil, the same crude oil that becomes gasoline, the same crude oil that gets pumped out of the ground and shipped across the ocean in tankers. Somebody took that, cleaned it up, put it in a little blue jar, and now you rub it on your mouth. You've been doing it your whole life. Before you throw your Vaseline in the trash, though, this story is more complicated than that, and way more interesting. The full history of how petroleum jelly went from oil-field gunk to a billion-euro skincare brand involves a 22-year-old chemist, a guy named Drake who hit oil at 69.5 feet underground, self-inflicted burns, horse-drawn wagons loaded with free samples, and a man who claimed he ate a spoonful of Vaseline every single day and lived to 96. It all starts in a small town in northwestern Pennsylvania. On August 27, 1859, a former railroad conductor named Edwin L. Drake changed the world. Working for the Seneca Oil Company alongside a salt well driller named William Uncle Billy Smith, Drake struck oil at 69.5 feet below the surface near Titusville, Pennsylvania, and that single well is universally regarded as America's first commercial oil operation. The modern petroleum industry launched overnight. The speed of what followed is staggering. Pennsylvania produced about 2,000 barrels of oil in 1859, and by 1865, that number had exploded to roughly 500,000 barrels. Titusville flooded with people chasing the same dream. Call it a gold rush, except the gold was black and came out of the ground in liquid form. And that's the thing about an industry that grows that fast. It creates all kinds of byproducts that nobody knows what to do with yet. One of those byproducts was a waxy, sticky residue that built up on the sucker rods and pumping equipment. Workers hated it because it gummed everything up, and they had to periodically stop drilling just to scrape it off the rods and keep the pumps running. They called it rod wax. What the oil workers noticed, though, was that rod wax seemed to help their injuries. Cuts and burns happened constantly on those rigs, and the men who had rod wax on their skin appeared to heal faster, with wounds that looked better than expected. Before long, workers started deliberately rubbing the stuff on their cuts and burns. It was crude, unrefined, and literally scraped off industrial equipment, but it seemed to work. That is exactly when a young chemist from New York showed up. Robert Augustus Chesebrough entered the world on January 9, 1837. Born in London to American parents and raised in New York City. His original career involved clarifying kerosene from sperm whale oil, which was a real job in the 1800s. He made lamp fuel for a living. Then petroleum arrived, and the rise of coal oil threatened to make his entire trade obsolete, which meant Chesebrough needed a new direction. He went to where the action was. Following Drake's strike, Chesebrough traveled to the Titusville oil region around 1859 to research what new products could come from petroleum. Most sources, including the official Vaseline history, date this visit to 1859 when Chesebrough was 22 years old, though a few sources place it in 1865. The exact year isn't firmly documented, but what matters is what happened when he arrived. Oil workers scraping waxy gunk off their equipment and rubbing it on their skin caught his attention immediately. He listened to them describe how rod wax seemed to help their cuts and burns heal. Where those workers saw an annoying industrial byproduct, Chesebrough saw an opportunity, and he carried samples back to Brooklyn. What followed were years of grinding work, commonly described as roughly a decade. Chesebrough set up shop in Brooklyn and began experimenting with how to take dark, foul-smelling petroleum residue and turn it into something clean, pure, and usable. The breakthrough came when he discovered that distilling the petroleum residue and filtering it through bone black, also known as bone char or animal charcoal, produced a dramatic transformation. This was actually the same principle used to whiten sugar. You run the crude substance through the filtration material, and what emerges on the other side bears almost no resemblance to what went in. The result was a clear, colorless, odorless jelly. And here's the part that shows you how serious he was about this product. Chesebrough tested it on himself, deliberately cutting his own skin, burning himself, then applying the jelly and documenting how the wounds healed. He served as his own test subject in an era where that was basically the only way to prove something worked. His first filtration patents arrived in 1865. U.S. patent number 49,230 for a steam filter process came through on August 8th, followed just 2 weeks later by patent number 49,502 for bone black filtration on August 22nd, and then patent number 56,179 for the bone black preparation itself on July 10th, 1866. But here's the thing, none of those were the one that mattered most. That came on June 4th, 1872, when Chesebrough received U.S. patent number 127,568, titled Improvement in Products from Petroleum. The language in the patent is almost blunt. It reads, "Be it known that I, Robert A. Chesebrough, of the city, county, and state of New York, have invented a new and useful product from petroleum, which I have named Vaseline." June 4th, 1872. Oilfield rod wax officially had a brand name. The word Vaseline has a documented etymology. Chesebrough combined the German word Wasser, meaning water, with the Greek word eleon, meaning oil, reflecting a 19th century belief that petroleum somehow formed from water. There's a separate anecdote floating around that he named it after mixing early batches in his wife's flower vases, vase plus the suffix line. But the water plus oil origin is the one with actual documentation behind it. This is where the story gets fun, because Chesebrough had a beautifully refined petroleum jelly, a patent, and a name, but absolutely no customers. Early sales crawled. Nobody walked into a store asking for petroleum jelly in the 1870s, which meant Chesebrough needed to go full showman. He loaded up horse-drawn wagons with Vaseline and started traveling around New York, running about a dozen wagons to distribute the product. He went directly to housewives and doctors, handing out free samples everywhere he stopped. The demonstrations, though, were on another level entirely. Chesebrough would burn or cut his own skin in front of a live audience, then apply Vaseline to the fresh wound and show them older injuries in various stages of healing where he'd already been using it. That was his sales pitch. Live self-injury followed by petroleum jelly application. And it worked. By around 1870, Vaseline was selling commercially, and Chesebrough had opened his first factory in Brooklyn. Just 2 years after official branding, by 1874, Americans were buying Vaseline at the rate of a jar a minute, which comes out to over 1,400 jars a day, according to Vaseline's official history. 1875 brought the founding of the Chesebrough Manufacturing Company, and by that point, customers had found uses for Vaseline that went far beyond wound care. They used it on cuts and bruises, sure, but also for removing stains, polishing wood, restoring leather, and preventing rust. The product had become a household staple in the truest sense. For some context on where that growth ended up, Vaseline claims that over 100 jars sell every minute worldwide today, which means that original 1874 pace of 1 jar a minute has multiplied by more than 100 times. Let's talk chemistry, because this is the part most people skip over, and it's the part that actually matters if you're trying to decide whether to worry about this. Petroleum jelly, also called petrolatum or mineral jelly, is a semi-solid mixture of hydrocarbons made up of long-chain saturated alkanes and cycloalkanes with carbon numbers above roughly C25. These are big, heavy, stable molecules. The stuff comes from the heaviest fraction of crude oil refining, called the vacuum residue. This is what's left after you've distilled off all the lighter fuels like gasoline, kerosene, and diesel, literally the bottom of the barrel. Turning that residue into something safe for skin requires multiple cleanup steps. Propane deasphalting, hydrogenation to strip sulfur and impurities, solvent and vacuum dewaxing, and adsorption and filtration through materials like bone char, bauxite, or activated carbon. What comes out the other end is insoluble in water, with a melting point near body temperature, which explains why it softens the moment you touch it. It's odorless, chemically stable, and has a very long shelf life. And when you apply it to skin, it forms an occlusive film that acts as a physical barrier trapping moisture in. Vaseline markets their version as triple purified, and it's fragrance-free, hypoallergenic, non-comedogenic, with the National Eczema Association seal of acceptance. Modern Vaseline still comes from petroleum byproducts. That part is true, but here's what the "it's gasoline on your face" crowd gets wrong. The refinement level and composition are entirely different from crude oil or gasoline. Calling Vaseline crude oil is like calling vodka potato water. Technically, there's a connection, but a lot happened in between. That said, there is a real safety conversation to be had here, and it's more nuanced than most people make it. Petrolatum and white petrolatum carry FDA recognition in the United States as safe and effective over-the-counter skin protectants at concentrations of 30 to 100%, approved for minor cuts, scrapes, burns, and chapped skin and lips. That's the American position. The European Union takes a different approach entirely. In the EU, petrolatum can only appear in cosmetics if, and this is the key part, the full refining history is known and it can be shown that the substance from which it is produced is not a carcinogen. Without that documentation, it lands on the EU's CMR carcinogen list. The actual risk boils down to 3 letters: PAH, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. Some PAHs are probable human carcinogens, and they can show up in inadequately refined petroleum jelly. The EU restriction traces back to early 2000s reports of low-quality petroleum jelly, often from Eastern Europe, that came out dark and contained measurable PAH levels. None of that applies to pharmaceutical-grade petrolatum. The kind used in Vaseline gets purified to below detectable PAH levels and meets United States Pharmacopoeia standards for purity, which is the USP grade designation. But here's where the US and EU split. The United States has no refinement or PAH-specific requirement for cosmetic petrolatum, which means the major brands produce highly refined product voluntarily, with no regulatory mechanism forcing them to. That's the gap clean beauty advocates point to when they recommend choosing products that specifically say white petrolatum or fully refined. The dermatologist counterpoint is straightforward. Petrolatum is one of the most extensively tested skincare ingredients in existence, backed by roughly 150 years of documented use. Studies published in the Journal of Investigative Dermatology and the Journal of Allergy and Clinical Immunology show it doesn't just sit on top of skin. It actually penetrates between the lipid layers of the stratum corneum and supports barrier repair, with research showing it triggers antimicrobial and barrier responses. It's not merely inert. One number puts its effectiveness in perspective. A minimum concentration of just 5% petrolatum can reduce transepidermal water loss, the amount of moisture escaping through your skin, by more than 98%. A 2016 study measured its water vapor loss resistance at roughly 170 times that of olive oil. When dermatologists recommend it as a cheap, effective occlusive for barrier repair, wound aftercare, eczema, and chapped skin, they're drawing on actual research, not just tradition. Robert Chesebrough's personal relationship with Vaseline is one of the wildest anecdotes in consumer product history, and it's actually verified. Chesebrough publicly claimed to consume more than a teaspoon of Vaseline every single day and credited the habit for his longevity. This is not internet folklore. Snopes traced the claim to a letter published in the March 2, 1933 edition of the Spring Lake Gazette, where Chesebrough wrote, and this is a direct quote, "I take more than a teaspoon daily, and I believe I owe to it my approaching 97 years of age." September 8, 1933 brought his death at age 96 in Spring Lake, New Jersey, in an era when U.S. life expectancy hovered around 60. Whether the Vaseline had anything to do with his longevity is another matter entirely, because there is absolutely no scientific basis for health benefits from eating petroleum jelly, and both Unilever and Britannica explicitly advise against it. There's also a widely repeated story claiming that when Chesebrough came down with pleurisy, he had a nurse cover his entire body in Vaseline as a cure. Snopes investigated that one too and could not confirm it, rating the combined claims as mixture, meaning the daily spoonful part checks out, but the pleurisy cure does not. After Chesebrough's initial success, the brand grew fast. 1881 brought the Chesebrough Manufacturing Company under John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil, which made sense given that Standard Oil already served as Chesebrough's main supplier of rod wax. The company operated under Standard Oil until the 1911 antitrust breakup. Chesebrough stepped down as company president in 1908 and died in 1933, but the brand kept expanding without him. 1955 saw Chesebrough Manufacturing merge with Pond's to form Chesebrough Pond's Inc., and then on December 30th, 1986, Unilever acquired Chesebrough Pond's for $3.1 billion. That's how a 19th century petroleum jelly brand ended up inside one of the largest consumer goods companies on earth. Vaseline now ranks among Unilever's 30 power brands. According to Unilever's own 2024 reporting, the brand recently crossed the milestone of 1 billion euros in annual turnover and delivered double-digit growth in 2023. Sales reach more than 70 countries, with the US as the biggest market and China as the second largest following a 2015 relaunch. The product line has expanded well beyond the original healing jelly to include Vaseline intensive care lotions, Vaseline lip therapy, and newer science-led lines like Glutathione, Radiant X, and Proderma. The core product, that triple purified petroleum jelly in the familiar packaging, remains the anchor. Along the way, Vaseline turned up in some unexpected places. Robert Peary carried Vaseline on his 1909 North Pole expedition because petroleum jelly doesn't freeze. A practical choice, even though Peary's claim to have actually reached the exact pole is itself disputed by later historians. During World War I, Vaseline became a staple in the trenches, and during World War II in 1943, the U.S. Surgeon General commissioned petroleum jelly-coated gauze dressings specifically for wound care. Hollywood makeup artists found their own uses, applying Vaseline to fake glistening sweat on actors and smearing it on camera lenses for that diffused, dreamy look. Then came the modern chapter. Around 2021 and 2022, a skincare practice called slugging exploded on TikTok. Built on a simple idea. At the end of your nighttime skincare routine, you seal everything in with a thin layer of petroleum jelly. The hashtag slugging has racked up hundreds of millions of views, and it works because of that occlusive barrier, since petrolatum reduces water loss through skin by more than 98%. Dermatologists, including those at the Cleveland Clinic, have endorsed slugging for dry or compromised skin, with the main caution being for people with oily or acne-prone skin, and the advice not to layer it over active ingredients like retinoids or acids. What makes this story larger than one brand is something most people never think about. Only a fraction of every barrel of crude oil becomes non-fuel products, but that fraction is woven into nearly every part of your life. Petroleum derivatives show up in plastics, synthetic fibers like polyester and nylon, synthetic rubber, and asphalt. Lipstick and other lip products contain paraffin wax derived from petroleum, mascara relies on petroleum-based ingredients, and aspirin traces its chemistry back to benzene. Petroleum byproducts also appear in chewing gum base, dry shampoo propellants, and even in toothpaste through an ingredient called poloxamer 407. Petroleum jelly on your lips is actually one of the more straightforward examples because, at least with Vaseline, you know what you're getting. The ingredient list says Petrolatum, printed right there on the label. A lot of other petroleum derivatives in your daily life are much harder to spot. Alternatives do exist. Shea butter, cocoa butter, beeswax, coconut oil, jojoba oil, lanolin, and plant waxes like candelilla and rice bran wax all serve as natural occlusives that bring additional nutrients petroleum jelly doesn't provide. The trade-off is that none of them seal moisture as completely as petrolatum does, because that 98% water loss reduction is hard to match with a plant-based alternative. Let's come back to where we started. You put Vaseline on your lips, and yes, it is a petroleum byproduct, tracing directly back to the waxy residue that oil workers in 1859 Pennsylvania scraped off their drilling equipment and rubbed on their cuts. A 22-year-old chemist named Robert Chesebrough spotted that, carried it home to Brooklyn, spent years refining it, patented it on June 4, 1872, sold it out of horse-drawn wagons, burned his own skin to prove it worked, built a company, got absorbed into Standard Oil, and somehow created a product that Unilever now moves in over 70 countries for €1 billion a year. The man ate a spoonful of it every day and lived to 96. Nobody should try that, but it remains one of the strangest and most enduring success stories in consumer product history. Is it crude oil now? Not after distillation, deasphalting, hydrogenation, dewaxing, and triple purification. Was it crude oil once? Absolutely. And the fact that the most popular lip balm ingredient in the world started as industrial waste in the Pennsylvania oil fields is, at minimum, worth knowing about. Next time you unscrew that blue cap, you're holding 160 plus years of petroleum history in your hand, and you might as well know where it came from.